A recent, 2025 project we initiated was the Florida Black History YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, search Florida Black History, all one word, that's the name of the channel, you will find our previous episodes related, obviously, to Florida Black history. We've got another one today, and this connects to many of those previous episodes, including the Groveland Four and America's Most Racist Sheriff, lynching in Florida, the Klan in Florida, MLK in St. Augustine, also the Johns Committee, which is not
Yes.
specifically an African American history issue, but connects here as well. Our guest is Robert Fieseler, and he has written a fantastic not only account of Florida history, but investigative piece as well. The book is American Scare, Florida's Hidden Cold War on Black and Queer Lives. Now, this is a big topic, but we're going to pick up with one particular aspect of it.
Yeah, his book is primarily concerned with the Johns Committee, which was this sort of Florida version of the McCarthy era House Un-American Activities Committee. But he made an excerpt of that because he found out something important about the very first civil rights martyrs, I should say, Harry and Harriette Moore, and what happened to them. And that's why we wanted to talk to him about that.
Amazing investigative work here, amazing research, and an important book by Robert Fieseler, and he joins us right now.
Thanks so much for joining us. This is such an important topic, and I think not enough people know about it. Let me start off by asking you, who was Harry Moore, and why were people out to kill him? Maybe is a good way to phrase it.
Well, happy to be here today, Craig, and happy to talk about this subject. So, Harry T. Moore was basically Florida's version of Medgar Evers. He was not just a field secretary out, at the grassroots, but he was also a statewide organizer for the NAACP. So, Harry T. Moore was a guy born in Florida, went to Bethune-Cookman, am I pronouncing that right? College in
Yes.
Daytona Beach, then became a teacher in Brevard County, and as along with his wife Harriette, through his experience in the inequities of segregated education, became an activist for basically getting more resources towards Florida's undereducated Black population, et cetera. And that led to him founding the Brevard County chapter of the NAACP, and then eventually the Florida NAACP chapter writ large.
He was registering people to vote, wasn't he?
He was. So he was big in terms of ending in the 1940s this concept called the whites only primary, or the white primary, which was really important because people forget Florida, and up until like basically quite recently, historically, actually was a one party state, but not Republican. It was the Southern Democrats that actually ran the show. And so if you ran a white primary, basically that meant that there would be only white representation for the only party, the only game in town, in Tallahassee. And so Harry T. Moore railed against that. So basically he was known as a kind of, at least to white segregationists, a kind of racial rabble rouser. And to people that were advocating for integrationists, he was viewed as their kind of their sort of knight figure.
And we have to remember this is in the 1940s. This is well before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is really before what you would popularly call the civil rights movement that really picked up steam. So this is early. We're deep Jim Crow. This is as you and we will all get to. This is lynching time, bombing time.
Incredibly dangerous for a man even publicly advocating, talking about these activities, much less campaigning for them. And that made Harry T. Moore a kind of racial pioneer in the South. And he was really gaining a name for himself throughout the 1940s into the fateful early 1950s time.
What else can you tell us about him and his wife Harriette? What were they like?
Well, they were like a loving, long married couple. They were married, actually, they were incredibly religious. They were married on Christmas Day.
Oh my.
And they, much like a lot of aspects of the Southern Civil Rights Movement, their ideas about racial equality originated from a religious message. He was also known as a kind of strict educator, almost of the Booker T. Washington variety, in a classroom at least. He was known to have intense standards in terms of hygiene, articulation, correct sentence structure, etc., which led to him. He at first was taught several grades at a segregated school. Eventually, he was a school principal, a morally upright guy, not necessarily the wildest dude at a party.
Apparently not.
And a guy that had really a bone to pick with his society about inequities and about real laws being violated by segregationists. So in 1945, there was a U.S. Supreme Court decision that was supposed to cut down the white-only primary, and it was supposed to apply everywhere, even in Florida. And then some people paid attention to it, some people didn't. To the point where even in 1947, the legislature was still pondering whether or not they should make it a law that the whites-only primary no longer existed, and they didn't vote. They didn't really vote it through. And so this was the kind of intransigence he was facing, and I think that added intensity to his personality, where he was known to be a sort of attack dog on issues, especially if he saw rampant injustice. He felt that he as the executive secretary of the Florida NAACP, and also in his capacity as a principal, what have you, or just as a black man in the county that he lived in, he'd want to insert himself into issues to almost always advocate for the underdog.
Brave. And, as we are seeing today, a court can rule something. That doesn't mean anyone has to follow it. Courts do not have armies. Courts do not have enforcement. And the last time we saw anything on the order of outright ignoring court orders the way we are now with the Trump administration is the period you're talking about, the segregation area, where the Supreme Court or some court would say, no, you got to do this, you got to integrate, you got to offer this, that, or the other thing. And they just say, no, you and what army? Make me, that kind of thing.
Right.
So, whether it's Brown versus the board or what you're talking about, the ruling can come down in favor of goodness and righteousness and equality. That doesn't mean things change the following Monday.
Right.
It takes years and years and years and sometimes decades after that. How long had he and his wife been in Florida for?
Their entire lives.
Yeah.
So they were born and bred Floridians, no plans to leave. They staked their claim to this state. They wanted to fight their battles and campaigns in this state to make it better.
I guess we're at the point where we need to ask what happened on Christmas Day, 1951.
Couple things happened leading up to a notorious day. It was Christmas night, actually, 1951, which was the wedding anniversary of Harry and Harriette. I always find it funny when a couple marries and they have a similar name, but it was Harry and Harriette.
It can trip you up.
In 1949, there had been a infamous set of murder trials involving this in Lake County, involving this accused set of 4 black men called the Groveland Four, who were accused it seems like, as all evidence, falsely accused of raping a white woman. There was then a sort of lynch mob atmosphere that went after these 4 black men. One tried to escape to a neighboring state, and he was lynched and killed. 3 were arrested and lynch style and sort of flogged, tortured, forced to confess. In a local trial, one was deemed too young to stand trial as an adult, so he was found guilty and to life in prison. And then at the time that these 4 men were accused of rape, and that was especially involving, if the rape involved a black man, that was a capital offense, so that could lead to the death penalty. And so 2 of the men were found guilty and were sentenced to death. So Harry T. Moore stepped in, said that the trial had been basically a sham, and that civil rights of the accused were violated, and he got enlisted Thurgood Marshall, who was probably one of the greatest appellate lawyers ever, to represent the accused, the remaining 3 of the Groveland Four, and Thurgood Marshall, he was the chief attorney of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in New York City. This was all through the connection with Harry T. Moore's NAACP work. They took it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rarely did this, but they struck down the finding. They found it was so corrupt that they would have to retry the Groveland 3. And so, and then that led to the Lake County, basically this notorious attempted execution and successful execution, actually in each instance, where the Lake County Sheriff McCall transporting the accused back to trial in Lake County, basically took them out of his care. In the midst of his care, he decided to take them out on the side of the road, and he attempted to execute two of the Groveland 4. And he successfully killed one, and one sustained severe injuries, but lived. And so Harriette Moore started to openly politic against and criticize against Sheriff McCall of Lake County, and that became that created incredible controversy amongst the North Florida and all the way down to the center of Florida, because county sheriffs were like kings of kingdoms in the segregated South. They were great system guards for segregation. And so if you criticized a sheriff, it was known that you were placing your own life at risk. Harriette Moore was openly criticizing Sheriff McCall, who was continuing to get elected, and he would get elected through the early 1970s in Lake County, despite the fact that he executed 2 prisoners in his care, and attempted to execute 2 prisoners in care, successfully executed one of them. So the Central Florida segments of the Ku Klux Klan had enough of this Harriette Moore gentleman, and they wanted to make an example of him. So the Orlando Clavern specifically tapped a violent radical who was named Earl J. Brooklyn. And Earl J. Brooklyn, as part of his little Clavern, is sort of like a chapter of the Klan, he had a bomb maker named Joseph Cox, and they decided they were going to target and murder Harriette Moore and his wife in a sort of a political terrorism act, or what they viewed as a stroke of justice. Earl J. Brooklyn accessed the floor plans to Harriette Moore's home in rural Mims, Florida. It was a tiny unincorporated town of less than 350 people. They plotted out where they were going to place the bomb, which was more than 20 sticks of dynamite, sort of tied together by Mr. Cox, by the bomb maker. They selected the day they were going to do it, because they knew that Harriette Moore was religious. They decided to attack him on the religious holiday of Christmas. And they also knew that it was his wedding anniversary. And so they knew he would be home in observance of the religious tradition, the religious holiday, and also for, in observance of, the marital milestone. And so they waited outside. I don't know. I mean, like it's crazy to think about, but they basically didn't have the Christmas themselves, it seems. They waited outside the Moore home on Christmas Day, waited until Harry and Harriette went to sleep. Then they snuck underneath the house and knew right where to place the bomb beneath the box spring and mattress of Harriette Moore, left. And then on late into the night on Christmas night, they detonated the 20 plus sticks of dynamite beneath the first executive secretary of the Florida NAACP. And wow. When I first started researching this, I initially thought they died in the explosion, that they were eviscerated in the explosion. And I'd seen some misreporting that had occurred. They actually, this is the very sad thing, they survived the explosion with severe, terrible third and fourth degree burns. And then they both died in terrible agony in segregated medical care. In one case in an ambulance, another case in a hospital facility unequipped to handle severe burn victims due to the way that segregated resources were parsed out in medical care even. And so and that was their deaths on the notorious night of Christmas night, 1951.
And so what happened with the investigation into what happened to them?
Well, it was bungled, obviously, from a local perspective. There wasn't really an interest for state authorities to find an answer. And so the FBI had to step in at President Truman's request to end, they thought, racial genocide in Florida. Basically, this is what Truman said. at least told the
Wow.
FBI when he sicked the FBI agents. And the FBI had extensive network of informants in the Florida Klan, but many of them were many of the moles that the FBI thought they had in their pocket were actually just playing an obvious double agent game of feeding false information or what have you, and they actually became, as happens with snitch and the officer tied to the snitch, they became friends with the Klan moles. And so basically what happened is the FBI, essentially in the midst of their investigation, quickly figured out which division of the Klan had perpetrated this, that it was the Orlando Klan. They figured out who within the Orlando Klan had perpetrated, who's the mastermind, Earl J. Brooklyn, who was the bomb maker, Joseph Cox. They figured, and they even interrogated these individuals. A lot of the FBI moles played this obvious double game of lying and providing each other fake alibis, trying to say it couldn't have been possible that I was in MIMS on this day, I was with this group of other Klansmen, etc. And so there was a lot of false testimony that the FBI agents and the FBI handlers believed. Yet they still interrogated Earl J. Brooklyn, and they interrogated Joseph Cox, the bomb maker. And when the day after they interrogated Cox, in a way that wasn't really researched, died supposedly by suicide. And so that creates an issue of the investigation where you start to have suspects disappearing. And then this continued into the next year, where Earl J. Brooklyn becomes less and less easy to find. And then Earl J. Brooklyn, the mastermind behind the plot, dies himself on Christmas Day, 1952, 1 year to the day of the Moore assassination.
Goodness, just natural causes?
What's up?
Just natural causes? Just a total coincidence?
It's really unstudied. They're not sure. It seems to be natural causes. It wasn't. They're unsure. It wasn't like a terribly sick man. These are just people dropping off, and then it's not looked into. That compounds and creates issues with the investigation and their ability to derive an answer, because the justice system is not designed to convict people of crimes post-mortem. And so you have chief suspects who are going, and then you have other suspects who are around and part of Brooklyn's cabal who are starting to be covered by false alibis of other Klansmen who are known assets to the FBI. And so that stymies the FBI's investigation until eventually the public doesn't have a very long attention span in general in Florida, the white public, especially for anti-Black violence.
Yeah, that's true.
It drifts away. Though nationally, Black activists such as the famous poet Langston Hughes noted the assassination of Harriette Moore, even writes a poem about it that's read in a very large setting. Interest in Florida does not exist, and then eventually federal interest drops off. But within several years, it's just they decide it's just this sort of unsolvable crime. Well, we would have gotten them. We would have gotten them faster.
You got to think, we're talking, 1952, 1953. Certainly, the surveillance state is not set up the way it is today, where everyone's got a Ring camera and a camera on their phone and satellites and all that kind of stuff. DNA is not a thing. Fingerprinting does not exist the way we think of it. Forensic evidence is nothing. And more importantly than all of that, like you mentioned, the local and state law enforcement have absolutely no interest in pursuing this whatsoever. Beyond that, are more than likely obstructing it on the ground, doing their best part, because a lot of these people will be in the Klan themselves, local cops and sheriffs and state law enforcement as well. So a tough deal to try and prove. And again, this is not early stages FBI, but not the sort of resources and manpower we think of with the FBI today. And like you said, it just kind of goes away. And your book, if I understand correctly, one of the groundbreaking aspects of it is that it names these names for kind of the first time in public.
I was shocked when basically my book, American Scare, Florida's Hidden Cold War on Black and Queer Lives, is about this McCarthy era cabal that existed in Florida, run by a state senator from Stark, Florida, named Charlie Johns, and they called it the Johns Committee. It was nicknamed. The technical name was the Florida Legislative Investigation Committee. And I didn't think I would find anything on the Moors, because the Johns Committee starts in 1956. It's passed in a special session of legislature. It's sort of in a very concealed way while the state was debating interposition, which was whether or not the state government was going to assert its powers to preserve segregation over the U.S. Supreme Court's capacity to say separate but equal is unequal. And basically, this is all post Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954. And so, and then the Johns Committee continues through 65. So I didn't think I was going to find any information on the Moors and the Moore assassination. But it turns out so much of the racial violence that transpired in Florida after this was like the first major assassination of a major political civil rights leader in the civil rights movement. This predates Emmett Till's murder in Mississippi. This predates the driveway execution of Medgar Evers in Mississippi by more than 10 years. This predates all the other assassinations. And so basically, one of the first individuals that the Florida Johns Committee or the Florida Legislative Investigation Committee goes after is an individual who is trying to integrate the University of Florida Law School, a man named Virgil Hawkins. And Virgil Hawkins had applied post Brown v., thinking that he's a viable candidate. He should be able to go. He wants to be a lawyer. He should be able to go to Florida's best law school at the flagship university. The state of Florida stymies him, gives him the runaround, puts it in various state courts, appellate courts, various levels, bounces him various places. But the whole time he's being threatened racially. And Virgil Hawkins actually has to pretend, because he's aware of what happened to Harry T. Moore and Harriette Moore. He's scared that his wife, who's a school teacher, is going to be targeted for racial violence in addition to him. So he pretends to divorce his wife. And then Virgil T. Hawkins has to, in a series of towns in North Florida, has to sleep in the houses of various friends, circulating himself as if he's a member of the French Resistance or something like that, often sleeping beneath houses out of fear of and knowledge of the fact that the Klan commonly, one method of assassination is dynamite, and the method is to sneak underneath the house. So he felt that he would be able to see and circumvent that circumstance earliest by sleeping beneath houses. And so in the midst of this is happening, so Virgil Hawkins is aware of the Moors. Everyone's aware of the Moors. And the Johns Committee is attacking basically anyone who is Black in the state of Florida in the mid to late 50s who is attempting to take down some sort of segregated institution. So that includes all of the people that are protesting segregated busing in Tallahassee. That includes all of the ministers that are trying to integrate schools in Miami. That includes targeting the guy that's trying to personally integrate the University of Florida Law School, et cetera. And so the Florida public and the nation starts to say that the Johns Committee has a racial bias. You guys are targeting the NAACP. You're saying that they're communist agents or whatever. That's why you need to harass them and pull them into open McCarthy-esque hearings and get them under oath and then accuse them of perjury or hold them in contempt or, embarrass them, try to ruin their reputations, et cetera. And so the Johns Committee decides we're going to show our even-handedness against racial. We're just against racial radicals. The NAACP are racial radicals, so we're going to have an entire session of our committee devoted exclusively to the Florida Klan. We're going to do it all about stuff that happens in the Lake County area or stuff that happened in a town called separately from that, in a town called Live Oak. And this incident that happened in the early 1950s, that's past state statute of limitations, and we're all going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to get all the Klansmen to confess to things, and this is going to show even the NAACP people that we're anti, white racial radical too. So they decide that they're going to have a former FBI mole from Central Florida named Dick Ashey, a guy who then was running for the legislature after he'd obviously ceased to be a mole. And he was going to testify in a Tallahassee hearing room, make a committee room, about his involvement and what he learned as a Klan informant working for the FBI, working for basically the federal government. And he accidentally, in the midst of John's committee testimony, in the midst of state lawyers who had been very careful to ask what questions to what Klansmen, didn't want trying to not get any of them to admit to a crime that's like chargeable. And in the midst of a hearing where one of the John's committee members admitted at the beginning that he'd been a Klansman. I laugh because otherwise I'd cry. But so they decide that they're going to have Dick Ashey testify. Dick Ashey admits, he says, in the midst of his testimony, he's supposed to be talking about something that happened in 1955 in Live Oak. Instead, he backpedals and says he knows the guy, Brooklyn, who knew something about the bombing of Harry T. and Harriette Moore in Mims, Florida in 1951. And the state lawyer asks him to expand, and he says it's the husband and wife that died. It was a dynamite bombing. The guy's last name was Brooklyn, and he admitted that he had the floor plans to the Moore's house, and he told me about this. And
Wow.
It causes incredible awkwardness in the hearing, which was designed, they had tried to design to give the appearance of racial even-handedness, but now they had someone talking about an actual crime, an actual
murder, yeah,
prosecutable. And so Charlie Johns and the rest of the Johns committee, all the senators and legislators, they were arrayed behind, like the way that normal Senate or legislative hearings go. They're arrayed behind this rostrum. They're all sweating. They're all trying to move past this as fast as they can. And then Dick Ashey continues to talk, and he just lets loose, and he starts talking about the Klan that was from Stark, Florida, that was the hometown of Charlie Johns, this tiny little train depot town. And he starts naming all the officers in the Stark Clavern to the point where it seems like he almost is about to name Charlie Johns as something, or that he knew, like, of course, Johns these were townspeople he's naming. He must have known some of them. And the lawyer halts it. He tries to halt it. The guy keeps talking, and eventually Charlie Johns yells at one of his colleagues to try to that some sort of implication would impugn his character. But basically, in this testimony too, it's put up for debate whether or not it gets revealed or something funny happens, where it seems that Charlie Johns, the head of the Florida Johns Committee himself, may have Klan associations while giving this pretend hearing claiming to go after Klan racial radicals, in which one of the Johns Committee members who was asking the questions of Klansmen, had already admitted he was a Klansman. So it was a disaster. It was like, Charlie Johns typically at the end of these hearing days love to expound, give a big speech about how they've found some more communists, and et cetera, how this XYZ number of threats to the state have been eliminated, gives no concluding speech, and then tries to downplay in a sort of backroom way any of the significance of the fact that any of this stuff involving who's a Klan member and who might not be, and also this, and more importantly, anything to do with what Dick Ashey said about knowing the last name of the mastermind who told him that he'd perpetrated the killing of this very important civil rights political leader. Yeah. Basically, at that time, the Martin Luther King of Florida was Harry T. Moore. And and knowledge of that had actually accidentally spilled out, and it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. It just kind of sits, headline for a day. That's it.
And they actively tried to hide that information. They redacted the records.
Yeah, they did. When the McCarthy-esque Johns Committee closes in 1965, the great Charlie Johns perfectly executed his retreat from politics by supposedly using arcane rules from this 1885 post-Reconstruction Constitution that he knew like the back of his hand. He thought he sealed those records in perpetuity, including Dick Ashey's testimony about the Moors. Then after Charlie Johns dies in 1990, whoops, like the Florida people pass a constitutional amendment for the state that says that legislative records are going to be open for public review. And the Florida legislature then freaks out because they know this information's in it, this type of stuff's in it. And so they redact the names of all the victims, including the names Brooklyn and Moore from Dick Ashe's testimony. You'd think this would be viewed as like a sort of a informational coup in the early 1990s. We have knowledge, more knowledge of who killed what the state's basically most famous civil rights leader. And they would use that to move forward. In the 1990s in Mississippi, they were trying Byron De La Beckwith, the Klansman who it was the admitted murderer of Medgar Evers, and they would convict him of homicide actually in the 1990s. Nothing like that proceeded in Florida. And then those redacted records kind of just sat in the state archives for years and years until a weirdo like me found them, and then also got various access to secret sets of records involving the Johns Committee materials. And I was able to piece together Dick Ashe's testimony and recover the name this year to prove that the Johns Committee knew they had evidence about Moore's assassination in 1958, 7 years after the killing, and they did nothing with it. And actually, the federal government would have been informed, because they were watching the Johns Committee at the same time, and they did nothing with it too.
It demonstrates the importance of journalists, authors like yourself, historians, who not only have an interest in this material, but the time, energy, and resources from publishers or news outlets to go find this. This is not something you did in an afternoon. This is not something you did in a Google search. I mean, this is weeks, months, years of your life gumshoeing this information through archives, microfiche, the whole thing. And it also demonstrates, Craig, and we've talked about this a number of times before, sunshine laws.
Yes.
It's important to have that stuff available to reporters. And we are in a unique era of Florida's history where the state government is trying to shield itself from sunshine laws. Without journalists, without sunshine laws, this is the sort of material, information lost to history.
Yeah.
Yes, central aspects of major events.
What do you think Harry Moore's legacy is for Florida?
He organized some of the first major Black voting drives. So I would say that's one aspect of his legacy, is increasing the share of the Black vote at a time when it was actually very pivotal and very dangerous to do so. I would also say the end of segregated education. A lot of individuals who were part and parcel of the lawsuits that were ongoing even through the 70s to integrate schools, and Florida would constantly cite Harry T. Moore as an exemplar. He became a kind of symbol that I think inspired many people to, in his life and in his death, to join the nonviolent movement to bring down racial apartheid in Florida. So many of the members who were targeted by the Johns Committee in 1958, many of the leaders of the Miami NAACP, cite the assassination of Harry T. Moore as the reason they initially joined. It's this consistent rallying point, and it's also this a kind of, because it's still technically considered an unsolved crime, the assassination, it's this kind of perpetually motivating wound for activists to think about the need for continued progress. And that's been the reality for decades. It's shocking to me that Harry T. Moore's name is not mentioned in the same breath as Medgar Evers, as Martin Luther King, as Malcolm X.
Yeah, and that's because it was so early. At the time, like we talked about, 1951. Those other Medgar Evers and King and Malcolm X and all of the civil rights leaders and Selma and the Birmingham and the 16th Street Baptist, that came in somewhat rapid succession. This is so early. It kind of gets clipped off.
Right.
as if it's from a different era. And it is a terrible shame that this couple is not remembered, because they were a part of that same struggle. They just happened to be first, sadly. But
And
you know,
it shows that they were the tip of the spear in some ways.
Totally.
Their work even precedes like 1954 Montgomery bus boycott. That was the
Mhm.
initial event that introduced a very young Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to the world.
Yeah.
The Moores anticipate that. In many ways, Florida itself and Florida's Black population were the true NAACP pioneers.
Absolutely. And surely there had been countless lynchings and murders, but this was done very specifically for political purposes. Obviously, this was done to cease their political advocacy, to prevent Black people from registering to vote. So this wasn't a run-of-the-mill act of racial violence. This wasn't some Black man winked at a white woman and we're going to go get him tonight. I mean, this was done with a purpose and an intent to terrorize and chill any sort of activism like this. So from that standpoint too, it does stand out as remarkable. And what is MIMS today? Is there anything even left of the town, let alone their like house,
I haven't
or
been
where
to
they
it,
would have
but
been?
the house is kind of a historical center.
Is
I
it?
actually haven't been to MIMS. That's like sort of one of my life's journeys I need to take.
There is a memorial park there that has their name
Oh.
on it. Yeah.
Well, that's nice, because while these two obviously deserve prominence within the civil rights movement writ large, certainly within the history of Florida and civil rights in
Yeah.
Florida, they deserve a leading role. And until we started doing this podcast, Craig, and well, I guess until I read
Florida.
Florida, yes, I had never heard of them.
Yeah. But slowly but surely we bring these things to light and bring them back out for people to know about it.
Yeah, Robert, your book is doing that. Thank you for the work and for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you for your guys' work, and also for noting the importance of journalists.
Political assassinations, racial violence, the struggle for voting rights, so many contemporary echoes from, sadly, the Moors to what we are experiencing in 2025. That was a scary time. It's a scary time now. And hey, if your vote didn't matter, so many people wouldn't be so willing to go to such extreme measures to take it away.
That's a good point. Yeah. And so if you want to honor the memory of Harry and Harriette Moore, sign up to vote and go vote. Every time the polls are open, get out there.
Welcome to Florida.
Welcome to Florida.